The next few days felt like a strange kind of awakening. I wasn't sure if I was imagining it, but something had shifted. The mental fog, which had been a constant companion for so long, began to lift. The first morning after my new breakfast routine felt surprisingly calm. I woke up without that usual grogginess weighing me down. There wasn't the usual haze that clouded my mind before the caffeine kicked in. It was like my brain had already been switched on, and I didn't need to spend the first couple of hours stumbling around trying to focus. Each day that passed, I noticed subtle improvements. Little things at first. I didn't feel as scattered. The mental clutter wasn't as overwhelming. I could follow conversations more easily, and I wasn't repeating myself as much. One of the biggest changes was in the way I interacted with people. It felt like I was more present, more in tune with what was happening around me. Even when I was talking to my granddaughter, I noticed that I was more engaged, more connected to the moment. I didn't have that off feeling I'd had just a few days before when I'd forgotten her name. I didn't want to get ahead of myself, but I could see it. The clarity wasn't just temporary, it was becoming a pattern. And the more I paid attention, the more I realized how much better I felt. The connection between what I ate and how my brain felt became so obvious. It wasn't just that I was eating healthier. I was feeding my brain in a way that made a noticeable difference. I was curious about why it was working, so I did what anyone would do in this situation. I started researching. I wasn't trying to become a nutrition expert overnight, but I had to understand why these simple foods had such a profound impact. I wasn't surprised to find that nutrition plays a critical role in brain health, but I was surprised at just how directly the food we eat affects our cognitive function. It turns out that our brains are incredibly sensitive to what we feed them. They're made up of fats, good fats specifically, so eating foods rich in omega-3 fatty acids is essential for healthy brain function. I found out that these fatty acids help with neurotransmission, the communication between brain cells. Without enough omega-3s, the brain connections become weaker, which could explain why I had been feeling mentally sluggish. I'd read a lot about antioxidants too, especially from sources like berries and leafy vegetables. They combat oxidative stress, which is a big contributor to cognitive decline as we age. Oxidative stress happens when the free radicals in our bodies start attacking our cells, and our brains are particularly vulnerable to this damage. I was amazed at how simple foods like blueberries and spinach could help protect the brain from this kind of wear and tear. One nutrient I wasn't familiar with at the time was flavonoids. These compounds found in foods like dark chocolate, citrus fruits, and even apples are natural memory boosters. They help improve blood flow to the brain, which in turn helps with memory retention and cognitive function. I had always enjoyed a bit of dark chocolate, but now I realized it was more than just a tasty treat. It was food for my brain. By this point, it was becoming clear to me that this new breakfast wasn't just some random idea. It was a plan, a strategy backed by science. But even if I hadn't known all the details, the changes I was feeling were enough to make me stick with it. It wasn't just the breakfast that was different, I was different. My brain was more alert, my memory was improving, and I felt more connected to my life. So I kept going. Every morning, I ate that same meal. It became part of my routine, not just something I did for the sake of trying it out. And with each passing day, the improvements became more pronounced. My granddaughter commented on how much more like myself I seemed. I laughed it off, but inside I knew exactly what she meant. I was more present, more myself than I had been in weeks, maybe even months. It wasn't just about remembering names or appointments. It was about having the clarity to be fully engaged in life. I didn't need to rely on reminders or calendars to keep me grounded. I could remember what I needed to, and I wasn't overwhelmed by the constant anxiety of forgetting. The more time passed, the more convinced I became that what I was doing was working. It wasn't just a temporary fix, like some quick fix diet fad or miracle supplement. No, this was different. It was about creating a habit, a sustainable shift in how I nourished my body and brain. It wasn't that I felt magical or transformed overnight. There were no dramatic bursts of brilliance or sudden superhuman memory. Instead, it was a steady improvement, almost unnoticeable at first, but unmistakable in its consistency. One of the most satisfying changes I noticed was the way my days unfolded. It wasn't just about the absence of fog anymore. I felt lighter, more energetic. The lethargy that had plagued my mornings seemed to have vanished, replaced with a calm alertness that lasted well into the afternoon. Before, I would often feel mentally drained by noon, needing a cup of coffee or a sugary snack to get me through the day. But now there was no crash. My energy levels were stable, and I could focus without the usual distractions pulling me in every direction. It wasn't just that I remembered more. It was that I felt more engaged in the present moment. I began to notice things I'd overlooked for a long time, like the way the sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, or how my granddaughter's laughter sounded when she told me about her day. Those little moments were always there, but I hadn't been able to fully appreciate them before. It was like the world around me had come into sharper focus, and I could finally take it all in. By day 4, something even more profound happened. I had been sorting through some old family photos when I suddenly remembered the name of a childhood friend I hadn't thought about in years, Clara Jimenez. I hadn't heard that name in decades, but as soon as I said it out loud, I felt a wave of nostalgia and recognition. It was the kind of memory that usually slipped away from me in the past. But this time, it just came back, clear as day, without any effort. I called my daughter later that evening, and when I shared the memory with her, she laughed. "Dad, you sound different," she said. "You're more awake, more like yourself." And that was it. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just about remembering names or events. It was about reconnecting with myself. That evening, I sat quietly with my thoughts, reflecting on the past few days. I realized that it wasn't just the food that was making the difference. It was the sense of purpose that came with it. By intentionally feeding my brain, I was not only nourishing my body but also taking back control. The simple act of choosing to make breakfast a nourishing and mindful experience had begun to unravel the chain of forgetfulness and confusion that had weighed me down for so long. It felt like I had turned back the clock. I wasn't just thinking more clearly, I was living more fully. I was more in touch with the world around me, more present with my family, and more engaged with my own thoughts. The anxiety that had haunted me for months, the fear that I was losing my mind, started to fade away. It was still there in the background, but it no longer held the same grip on me. By now, I'd established a rhythm. Every morning, I followed the same routine, soaking the oats, adding the chia and flax seeds, chopping the banana, and throwing in the berries, turmeric, and cocoa. I didn't feel bored by it. I looked forward to it. Each ingredient became a small act of care, a way to tell myself that I was worth the effort, that I deserved to feel better. And with each passing day, I felt more and more like myself again. But I also wanted to understand why this simple breakfast had made such a difference. So I dug deeper into the science of it all. That's when I learned about the gut-brain connection. I had always known that gut health was important for digestion, but I didn't realize that it directly impacted cognitive function as well. Studies had shown that what we feed our gut, the bacteria, the nutrients, the fiber, can affect everything from our mood to our memory. I learned that when you feed your body the right nutrients, your gut sends signals to your brain, helping to regulate everything from emotional balance to mental clarity. It made sense. After all, it wasn't just what I was eating that mattered. It was how those foods were interacting with my system. By feeding my gut with fiber and antioxidants, I was not only supporting my digestion, but also optimizing my brain's function. And there it was, a new understanding of my body and mind working in harmony. I wasn't just throwing a bunch of superfoods together in a bowl. I was giving my body the fuel it needed to function at its best. I wasn't the only one benefiting from this newfound clarity. My granddaughter started to notice a change in me too. One day, while we were working on a puzzle together, she looked up at me with wide eyes. "Grandpa," she said, "you're more like yourself." Her words hit me harder than I expected. It was a reminder that, even though the changes had been gradual, they were noticeable to the people around me. I laughed and smiled at her. "I am, aren't I said as we continued our puzzle. But deep down, I felt a wave of relief. It wasn't just that I was remembering better, it was that I was becoming a better version of myself, more present, more engaged, more me. By the end of the fifth day, I knew I wasn't imagining things. The changes were real, and what struck me the most was that these weren't huge, dramatic shifts. No sudden bursts of genius or lightning bolts of memory. It was something much more subtle, yet powerful: clarity. I could think more clearly, my attention wasn't as easily diverted, and my memory was better, without feeling like I was putting in extra effort. It was like my mind was more organized, more in control. I realized something crucial. This wasn't just about the ingredients I had been eating. It was about consistency. It was the daily ritual that mattered. Each morning, I made a conscious decision to nourish my brain, and that decision was having a cumulative effect. Little by little, I was retraining my brain to function better, to remember more, and to think more clearly. It wasn't the result of a quick fix or a temporary miracle. It was the result of consistent care, something I could control, and something that didn't involve expensive pills or promises of magic. By now, I had fully embraced the routine. I didn't just feel better mentally, I felt better physically. The breakfast was now a cornerstone of my day, something I looked forward to every morning. I began to realize how much of my daily habits had been subconsciously influenced by what I ate for breakfast. Before, I'd been mindlessly consuming sugary cereals or just grabbing coffee and toast. But now I was feeding my brain with intention, and that intention was reflecting in every part of my life. One morning, while sitting down to my usual breakfast, I had a thought. I had been feeling so much better, but was it really just the food? I started to wonder if there was something deeper at play. Maybe the act of taking control, of making a choice every day to care for myself, had contributed just as much to my improvement as the actual ingredients in the meal. It was about giving myself the permission to be present, to take time for myself, to prioritize my well-being. Maybe that's why the clarity I had gained didn't just stay at the breakfast table. It was spilling over into other parts of my day. This wasn't just a memory boost. This was a shift in how I approached life. I found myself tackling tasks with more energy, finishing things I would have put off before. My granddaughter and I would spend hours working on her puzzles, and I'd find that my mind was sharper. I didn't lose track of what we were doing. I could focus, see the details, and most importantly, be engaged with her in ways I hadn't been for a long time. I wasn't just physically present. I was mentally present too. I couldn't help but think back to the morning I'd forgotten her name, that terrifying moment when my mind seemed to fail me in the most profound way. I thought about how far I had come since then. That morning felt like a wake-up call, and though I didn't know it at the time, it had been the catalyst for a change that had brought me back to life in a way I hadn't expected. But now it wasn't just about regaining lost memories or fighting off forgetfulness. It was about protecting my mind for the future. I was no longer afraid of the inevitable aging process. I wasn't going to fight it, but I was going to respect it by feeding my brain the right way. I realized that I wasn't just doing this for the here and now. I was setting the foundation for years to come. I also realized something else. The fear that had been hanging over me, the fear that I was losing my mind, was starting to fade. Yes, I had memory lapses, but they no longer controlled my life. The fear didn't have the same grip on me anymore. I had regained my confidence. I had taken action. And that in itself was empowering. I couldn't say it enough. This wasn't magic. It wasn't an instant transformation, but it was a change, a small one at first, that snowballed into something larger, something meaningful. And it wasn't just about breakfast. It was about choice. It was about making the decision to care for myself, to take control of my health, and to trust that those little decisions would add up over time. They certainly did for me. As I looked at the ingredients in my bowl, I realized that each one was contributing not just to my physical health, but to my mental resilience. The omega-3s from the chia seeds and flax seeds were helping my brain function at a higher level. The antioxidants from the blueberries and turmeric were protecting my brain from oxidative stress. The fiber in the oats was keeping my blood sugar levels stable, which is key for maintaining mental energy. And the cocoa. Well, the cocoa was a reminder that life doesn't have to be so serious all the time. Sometimes a little sweetness can go a long way in lifting your mood. But what struck me the most was that all of this was within my reach. I didn't need to spend a fortune on supplements or complicated recipes. I didn't need to rely on anyone else's magic solution. I had the power to improve my memory and my well-being with something as simple as what I put on my plate each morning. That realization was both humbling and empowering. As I moved forward, I knew that this wasn't just a phase. It wasn't just about fighting back against memory loss. It was about taking care of myself for the long haul. And that, I thought, as I enjoyed the last spoonful of my breakfast, was the real magic. By the time I hit the 6th day of this experiment, I was feeling better than I had in months, maybe even years. It wasn't just my memory, although that had certainly improved. It was everything. I felt more alive, more connected to the world around me. The fog that used to settle in my mind every morning had lifted, replaced with a calm alertness I hadn't known in a long time. I wasn't just remembering things, I was processing them more clearly, making decisions faster, and enjoying the present moment more fully. One of the most satisfying things was how the morning breakfast ritual had become a cornerstone of my routine. It wasn't a chore anymore. It was something I looked forward to. I didn't feel rushed or impatient to get it over with so I could start my day. It was like taking a moment to check in with myself before the world started demanding anything from me. That quiet time, when I carefully prepared my breakfast, was the first act of self-care I'd taken in a long while. But I wasn't just savoring the ritual for the sake of it. The benefits of that breakfast were clear. Not only did I feel more mentally clear and alert, but I also had more energy. It wasn't like the bursts of caffeine-induced energy I used to rely on. It was steady, consistent energy that didn't dip and crash. I felt awake but calm, ready to take on the day without that jittery feeling that used to accompany my mornings. I began to notice how much my mood had improved as well. It wasn't just about feeling mentally sharper, it was about feeling more grounded emotionally. I wasn't as quick to get frustrated or irritable. The anxiety that had lingered in the back of my mind, about my memory, about losing myself, had softened. I wasn't so afraid anymore, and that, more than anything, was the biggest relief. The interesting thing was that I hadn't expected all these changes. Sure, I had hoped that my memory would improve, but I wasn't prepared for the overall shift in my well-being. I had been so focused on fixing my brain, I hadn't realized that in the process, I was improving my entire life. It wasn't just about getting back what I thought I'd lost. It was about stepping into a new version of myself, a version that felt more connected, more present, and more whole. The more I reflected on it, the more I realized how much of our lives are dictated by routine. The simple act of changing one small routine, what I ate for breakfast, had triggered a ripple effect. It wasn't just the food that made a difference, it was the intention behind it. By deciding to take care of my brain, I was also deciding to take care of myself, to prioritize my health, and to be more present for the people I loved. It was as if this breakfast was giving me a foundation, a platform on which to rebuild the parts of me that had been slipping away. I started to think more about the science behind it all. I knew there were certain foods that directly contributed to better brain health, but I hadn't realized just how important consistency was. It wasn't enough to eat well once in a while, or to take supplements when I felt like it. This was about creating a daily habit, one that I could sustain. By committing to a brain-boosting breakfast every day, I was laying the groundwork for long-term mental health. I also began to appreciate how little I actually needed to make this work. The ingredients were simple: oats, chia seeds, flax seeds, berries, banana, turmeric, cocoa. These weren't exotic, hard-to-find superfoods. They were things I could find at any supermarket, and yet the impact they had on my life was profound. It wasn't about expensive solutions or trendy diets. It was about nourishment, both physical and mental. One thing that stood out to me as I continued this journey was how connected everything seemed to be. I had always thought of my body and mind as two separate entities, but now it felt like they were inextricably linked. What I fed my body directly impacted my mind, and the state of my mind influenced my overall health. I wasn't just feeding my brain, I was feeding my soul. I had become more present in my daily life, more engaged with my family, and more involved in the world around me. I didn't feel like I was missing out on anything anymore. But there was still a part of me that remained cautious. It wasn't that I doubted the changes I had experienced. No, I knew the improvements were real, but I had also seen how easy it was to get swept up in the promise of quick fixes and overnight transformations. This wasn't like that. I wasn't going to wake up tomorrow with perfect memory or a fully restored mind. But what I had found was something much more sustainable, a practice, a habit that could continue to serve me in the long term. I also realized that there was no magic formula, no one-size-fits-all solution. What worked for me might not work for everyone, and that's okay. But if there was one thing I'd learned, it was that the simplest changes, when made consistently, could have a profound impact. And I wanted to share that with others. It wasn't about selling a miracle product or promising instant results. It was about making small, mindful decisions that add up over time. The more I spoke to people about my experience, the more I realized how common these struggles were. Many of us, as we age, start to feel like we're losing control over our minds. We forget names, dates, places, and we worry. But I had learned that it wasn't too late to make a change, that there were things I could do right now to protect my memory and my mind. I wasn't going to sit idly by and wait for things to get worse. I had the power to change my own narrative. And I hope that by sharing my journey, I could inspire others to take charge of their own health and well-being too. Now every morning as I sit down to enjoy my brain-boosting breakfast, I think back to that morning when I stood frozen in front of the sink, struggling to remember why I'd walked into the room. It feels like a distant memory now, a time before I knew what was truly nourishing for my mind and body. Today I'm more aware, more present, and more in control than I've been in a long time. And that, to me, is the real magic. The journey I'd been on felt surreal at times. Looking back, it almost seemed too simple to have had such a profound impact. A few small changes, a new routine, and a commitment to nurturing my brain in the morning. Was that really all it took? I wasn't sure, but what I did know was that my life had improved in ways I hadn't imagined possible just a week ago. I think the most remarkable part of all this wasn't the memory improvements or the mental clarity, though those were significant. What really stood out was the shift in how I approached life. I used to feel like I was constantly playing catch-up, like my mind was lagging behind, trying to catch up with everything else. But now I felt like I was in control again. My brain wasn't a malfunctioning machine. It was functioning at its best, and I had helped it get there. The changes weren't drastic, but the steady progress gave me a newfound sense of agency. I wasn't just letting things happen to me. I was choosing to act, choosing to take control of my health, and choosing to prioritize my mind. And that, I think, is what had truly changed. The sense of agency, the feeling that I could make a difference in my own life, no matter my age. I wasn't some passive observer of my cognitive decline. I was actively taking steps to improve, to protect my mind, and to be present. I realized how much power we all have over our own well-being if we just decide to act on it. The ritual of my brain-boosting breakfast had become more than just a meal. It was an act of self-care, a moment of mindfulness that grounded me in the present. As I prepared the oats, added the seeds and fruits, stirred it all together, I felt like I was taking care of something much bigger than just my body. I was taking care of my future, my memories, my identity. And it wasn't just about what I ate. I began to pay attention to other aspects of my health. I started walking more, getting outside for some fresh air. I joined a local group that met once a week for walks. It wasn't a hardcore fitness regime, just a gentle reminder to move my body. Movement, I learned, was just as important for mental clarity as what I put in my food. Walking outdoors helped clear my mind, helped me process thoughts more effectively. It was the perfect complement to the brain-boosting breakfast that had started my mornings off right. But it wasn't only physical health that I was nurturing, it was my social connections as well. I made more of an effort to reach out to friends and family, to reconnect with old colleagues, and even pick up the phone to call a neighbor I hadn't spoken to in years. I hadn't realized just how much I'd let those relationships slip by. The more I nurtured my brain and my body, the more I realized how important it was to nurture my connections with others too. Socializing, engaging with people, sharing meals, laughing together. These were all powerful ways to support cognitive function. I think the key lesson from all of this is that memory and brain health are not isolated from the rest of our lives. It's easy to think of memory as this independent, abstract thing, something that either works or doesn't. But what I learned over the past week is that it's interconnected with everything else we do: our physical health, our emotions, our relationships. They're all woven together, and when we take care of one area, the others begin to improve as well. I found that focusing on my mental health wasn't just about preventing or combating memory loss. It was about enhancing my overall quality of life. I wasn't just preventing the worst case scenario of cognitive decline. I was enriching the life I had right now. I wasn't waiting for the inevitable to happen. I was living in the moment, fully present, and enjoying the small, beautiful things in life: the sunshine through the window, the laughter of my grandchildren, the taste of a fresh, well-prepared breakfast. By the time I hit the seventh day of my experiment, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I'd come. What had started as a simple experiment, a small change in what I ate, had transformed my life in ways I hadn't expected. The clarity in my thoughts, the steadiness in my mood, the sharpness of my memory, it all felt like a gift. But it wasn't magic, it was biology. It was choosing to care for my brain, one meal at a time, and giving it the fuel it needed to work at its best. And even though the improvements had been gradual, they were undeniable. Now every day felt like a new opportunity. I wasn't afraid of what might happen to my mind in the future. I wasn't waiting for the worst to come. I was taking action, I was moving forward, and I was giving my brain what it needed to stay sharp. And most importantly, I was living in the present. I wasn't stuck in a cycle of fear or uncertainty. I was moving through life with a sense of purpose, with a clear mind, and with the confidence that I could handle whatever came my way. As I sat down at my breakfast table, I looked at my bowl of oats, berries, seeds, and cocoa, and I smiled. It wasn't just about food anymore. It was a reminder that I had the power to take care of myself, that I had the ability to improve my brain and my life, no matter what age I was. And that, I thought, is the real magic. The magic of taking control of your health and your future, one small choice at a time. As I reached the eighth day, I realized that I had embarked on a journey far beyond what I could have imagined when I first began. What started as a simple attempt to tackle my memory loss had turned into a complete transformation. I had set out to fix something that felt broken, but what I discovered was that I wasn't just repairing my mind, I was reinventing my entire approach to life. I had learned through trial and error that our brains are powerful. They can adapt, heal, and grow, but only if we feed them the right things. It's not about finding a magic pill or some shortcut to health. It's about making small, deliberate decisions every day that build upon each other, creating long-lasting changes. In my case, it was as simple as the foods I chose to eat, the steps I took to nurture my mental and physical health, and the mindset I adopted. One of the most profound shifts in my life was the way I viewed aging. It used to terrify me. I felt like I was fighting a losing battle. I saw each passing day as a reminder that time was slipping away, that my brain was slowly deteriorating, and I had no way to stop it. But that fear had started to fade. As I began taking small, consistent steps to care for my brain, I started to realize that aging wasn't something to fear. It was a part of life. What mattered wasn't trying to stop it, but how I chose to face it. The decision to care for my mind, to invest in its health, gave me a new sense of purpose. It wasn't about regaining what I'd lost. It was about gaining more time with my family, being present in my daily life, and living without that constant worry about forgetting or losing myself. I wasn't stuck in the past. I wasn't waiting for the future to unfold. I was here now, fully engaged and enjoying life. I wasn't just existing, I was living. The positive impact wasn't just mental or physical either. It affected my relationships in ways I hadn't anticipated. My family noticed the difference. My granddaughter, once unsure about my forgetfulness, now saw a grandpa who was fully present. I could remember the little details, her favorite games, the things she loved to talk about, and more importantly, I could engage with her in a way that felt real and meaningful. There was no more awkward silence, no more fear of saying the wrong thing. We could enjoy each other's company fully. And it wasn't just my granddaughter. My children noticed the difference too. My daughter, who had been the first to voice concern when she saw my memory slip, remarked on how much sharper I seemed. "You're more like yourself," she said, the same words my granddaughter had used. And to be honest, that was the biggest compliment I could have received. It meant that I had regained not just my memory, but the essence of who I was. The process of making small, intentional changes, whether it was changing my breakfast, walking more, or re-engaging with people, had restored my sense of self. It was a reminder that I didn't have to wait for something catastrophic to happen. I could make choices every day to take care of my health, my mind, and my future. And as I made those choices, I felt empowered, not helpless. I also realized that this wasn't just about memory. It was about living with intention. Our brains, like our bodies, need consistent care and attention. It's easy to take things for granted, to assume that our minds will work as they always have. But the truth is, if we don't actively support our brains, they can start to decline just like any other part of our body. I had spent so long ignoring that fact, hoping it would just work itself out. But by making those small, mindful changes, I had taken control in a way I never thought possible. I wasn't just waiting for the inevitable. I was actively doing something about it. One of the things that I had discovered along the way was that the foods I had chosen weren't just good for my brain, they were also good for my heart, my digestion, and my overall health. The combination of omega-3s, antioxidants, and fiber helped stabilize my blood sugar, reduced inflammation, and provided the vitamins and minerals my body needed to function optimally. It wasn't just about mental clarity anymore. It was about holistic health. I had made a decision to nourish myself completely, and the results were undeniable. Even now, as I sit down to my breakfast each morning, I can't help but feel grateful. Not just for the clear mind I have today, but for the journey that got me here. It wasn't about instant fixes or miracle cures. It was about consistency, patience, and intentionality. Every morning, when I mix the oats with chia, flax, banana, and berries, I am reminded of how far I've come and how much control I now have over my health. And that feels like a victory. But there's one thing I want to stress. This journey isn't just about improving memory or boosting brain function. It's about being present. It's about showing up for the people you love, the moments you cherish, and the life you want to live. When you take care of your brain, you're not just taking care of your memory, you're taking care of your life. You're giving yourself the opportunity to fully experience everything, to enjoy every moment without the worry of forgetting it. As I look back on everything I've learned, the most important takeaway is this. It's never too late to start. No matter where you are, no matter how old you are, you can make a difference in your own health. It doesn't have to be dramatic. You don't have to make huge changes overnight. Start small with simple choices that support your body and mind, and let those choices add up over time. I did it, and so can you. So, if you're reading this, wondering whether you should try making some changes, my advice is this. Don't wait. Start today. Even if it's just changing one small thing, like what you eat for breakfast. You might not see results immediately, but trust me, over time, those little changes will add up, and you'll notice the difference. And one day you'll look back and realize how much better you feel and how much more control you have over your life. As for me, I'm just grateful. Grateful that I took the time to care for my mind and my body. Grateful that I can look forward to more mornings of clarity, focus, and presence. And most of all, grateful for the second chance I gave myself to live fully, no matter my age.